Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to talk about the subject of, do superheroes need to disguise their voice? The reason why I bring this up, obviously, like when you actually kind of notice it from time to time, not all superheroes do, disguise their voice. Most, I feel like, don't. But I feel like the ones that do typically end up being more so on the vigilante side of things. I could be mistaken about that, but it was just something kind of interesting floating through my head, because it's like, or you take someone like Batman, and obviously this is something, I don't know if they've ever made a distinction in the comic books between how Bruce sounds naturally and how he sounds, in the, as Batman. But obviously that's all, and it depends on the different Batmans, but I feel like typically it seems like that isn't always a big distinction either. I'd actually looked into this because it's been years since I've seen the animated series, but from what I've heard, when it comes to Batman animated series from the 90s, apparently Kevin Conroy did have two very distinct voices for Bruce Wayne and Batman, but as the years went on, he kind of like subtly, the differences were a little bit more toned down. Which I think is interesting, because like in my head, because I think I'm so used to Kevin Conroy's voice being a certain way, so I think, more recent stuff, I feel like the voices aren't that different. I feel like they don't go out of their way to make much difference between the different Bruce Wayne and Batman to a certain extent, because because in the grand scheme of things, because obviously the one that kind of jumps out in my head is like, obviously the whole Christian Bale situation. Where is she? Like that's the one that everyone kind of goes to, of like, obviously you're kind of ripping your vocal cords apart doing that all the time, but like the fact of the matter is that was kind of like his way to kind of distinct. And I guess in the grand scheme of things it makes sense, because it's like, oh, Batman's supposed to be this menacing dark figure, so you want to kind of scare them, so you want to have like a different voice. Also, like I said, if someone like recognizes you as Bruce Wayne, they'd be like, wait, Bruce Wayne and Batman sound exactly the same. And maybe that's a more modern way to kind of deal with that. Like maybe that was never a concern, much like, how Superman and Supergirl look exactly the same because they don't wear masks or anything. But I think it's, obviously I've talked about that before. Their disguises work a little differently, especially in Clark Case, in the sense that like, oh, he is supposed to be unassuming. Because that's actually something that came up during the Crisis crossover in the Arrowverse on the CW, was like Lex Luthor was like, oh, Clark Kent must be Superman on this world, but the Clark Kent on my Earth 38, couldn't be Superman because he's so unassuming, unimpressive, and that's kind of the point, kind of fade into the shadows so no one really takes notice of you. That's kind of like the whole point. So that's kind of their way of doing that, but it's like Batman's way. Like I said, a mask seems like it would help, but like, even because like a great example would be like the Arrowverse stuff. Like, once again, it's like taking like Oliver Queen. He actually for a while would change his voice, but it's more so like, it's a combination. It seems like he'd actually change his voice, but also it seemed like it was like a modulation on his voice, like an effect or whatever that kind of changed his voice. And obviously it seems like Barry would do that too, but it's been so long I don't remember if Barry did it himself because of his speed, because other speedsters kind of done that. Typically it's been villains, but still I can't remember if that was something Barry just did on his own or not, and because it doesn't happen that often. It kind of happens a little infrequently. At least with the Oliver situation, it happened frequently enough. Obviously, at this point in time, spoilers, in Arrow, like, everyone knows that he's a Green Arrow, so it's not like he has to hide his identity anymore. So that's not really a thing. But then I think even without the modulation, I think he still would kind of have a more gravel, kind of similar to Batman, kind of have like a more gravel to his voice, It's supposed to, like I said, it's supposed to be menacing. And that whole conversation about modulation is kind of an interesting thing, because I feel like that's the more recent, way to handle that separation. Because obviously a prominent example of that would be Ben Affleck's Batman, and Batman v Superman. That was a thing for him. I don't remember if he uses it at all in Justice League, but obviously in Batman v Superman he does, And obviously that's something that, I've talked about this before, that's also a thing in the Telltale Batman as well. Other than Batwoman too, I can't forget about that, because Kate does that too. Once again, her situation is especially for the people that are around her that know what she naturally sounds like her stepsister Mary or her ex Sophie, or even her dad. Like, of course you want to disguise your voice so they wouldn't be able to recognize you. So, but like you would think having a mask would kind of compensate for that, like I said, because no one else does that, Because in my mind I was starting to think like maybe it's just a Bat situation, because obviously they made a point to do that with Batman, but no other superhero. So I was thinking like, oh, since Batwoman does it, maybe all the Bats do it. But it's like, you look at Titans, neither Dick Grayson nor Jason Todd do it. And obviously we've never gotten to experience Bruce as Batman in that continuity, so we don't know, maybe in the past he did do a different voice, or maybe he just, modulated it. So we don't really know how he handled that whole situation. Like, it seems like none of the Robins do that, so why would he? I mean, it doesn't seem like any of the heroes, whether it be Hulk or Dove, do it either. Like, so like, because I said, it feels like more like a vigilante thing, like having to disguise your voice. I guess you have other ways, like, because you don't see, Aquaman or Wonder Woman really doing that. And like I said, I feel like the Flash situation, that's something they did with the show, but like, typically I feel like Barry's voice. But once again, this is just based on like some video games as well as like animated series where that was never a thing, but maybe that's because they never worried about it. I think the whole thing is like when you bring it to live action, depending on how realistic you want to get with it, you might have to kind of consider stuff like. And the reason why this all kind of ended up circulating in my head is because, like, I want to say a couple months ago, Robert Pattinson had talked about the fact is he had done a movie with Willem Dafoe, The Lighthouse, and I haven't seen the movie, but apparently like Willem Dafoe kind of did something with his voice in it that Robert Pattinson was like, oh, I'm gonna kind of take a little bit of that, kind of apply it to my Batman. So it seems like he might be going down the more, obviously, like I say, Christian Bale, kind of Kevin Conroy route of shifting his voice, because it doesn't seem like he's doing like the modulation. But to be fair, this is supposed to be a slightly younger Batman, and obviously the rumors say that it's supposed to take place in the 90s, so maybe technologically it's not. Well, no, because obviously like voice changers are already a thing, but maybe just because they're not technologically there yet, technically, to the extent you probably would want it. I don't know. Maybe just they would make that a much later Batman thing. Not like I have a problem either way, I just think it's kind of interesting, because I think in my mind, like, using a device just on the modulation, it's such an interesting, like, modern day situation. But once again, it's like, but it's not a modern day thing that anyone else does. It's just a handful of superheroes to do it. This is just me talking more so on the DC side of things, but even look at Marvel, especially with the MCU. Just even like the Marvel TV shows, that wasn't really a thing. Because this is something I've talked about before, obviously, like in Marvel, like where everything is, all the shows and stuff like that, secret identity isn't really a thing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so disguising your voice isn't even something that any of the heroes actually do, except like I think in Homecoming, they made a joke about that where Peter's trying to disguise his voice to seem more menacing, but obviously it doesn't work out and obviously it doesn't stick, so it's just one of those interesting things. So like I said, this was just stuff that was kind of floating in the back of my head. I'd love to get to know your thoughts about this whole situation. Thought about how some heroes do it but some don't. Would it bother you if more superheroes did do it? And obviously these are just some that I'm mentioning that I'm aware of. There might be others that do. Like I said, I don't know if in comic books and stuff like that they've ever made a point to kind of distinguish that. It probably wasn't. It's probably not really a thing, but I don't know. I always think it's kind of an interesting thing, especially considering, voice recognition and stuff like that, just on a personal level, but also like technologically how that could be. So, disguising your voice probably would come in handy. So I don't know. It's, like I said, my thoughts. I'd love to get to know yours. Really, that's all I'm going to talk about until the next one. Me, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest and enjoy it. Good day and good